shared, one of the many economic consequences of the pandemic is a massive expansion of what's called the gig economy. And while that freedom certainly has its upside, the significant downside is the inability of the gig economy to save for retirement. Here to talk about that as part of our retirement series, brought to you by Fidelity Investments, is Caroline Bruckner, Managing Director of the Tax Policy Center at the School of Business at American University. Caroline, nice to see you. Before we get into their saving for retirement, or perhaps lack thereof, who exactly is the gig economy? What types of jobs are we talking about? And how fast are they growing?
So that is a really great question, because our understanding of who is in the gig economy is changing month to month, particularly since the COVID-19 pandemic pushed people out of traditional work and people had to make ends meet. You got to think about gig workers as both on-platform workers, so people that use a platform like Uber or Lyft to connect with customers and process payment. But then there are all sorts of off-platform people like that you likely know, who do odd jobs, side hustles, and gigs to earn extra money on the side. The key here is to really understand that it's these side hustles that constitute the overwhelming larger part of the gig economy, which is predominantly folks that are doing secondary jobs as a supplemental source of income. And quite frankly, our retirement system isn't set up to account for that when it comes to retirement savings.
I guess I now consider myself a member of the gig economy now that you've clearly defined it for me. So is this portion of people, which I understand is now 50 million strong, are they saving for retirement? If they're not, what's their reason?
So it depends on who you ask. So higher wage individuals tend to have tend to have cash flow. And they are doing gig work because it comes their way. They get a secondary consulting job or a side hustle and say, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that gig, and maybe throw that money into some sort of retirement savings or savings account. But it's really the low wage workers who might not otherwise have access to retirement savings that you really want to be concerned about. And those folks are doing gig work as a supplemental source of income because they already can't make ends meet. They have cash flow problems. And we know that coming out of the pandemic, Pew Charitable Trust put together a survey of non-traditional workers and found that wide swaths of them had existing low retirement accounts, and more of them were having trouble with cash flow and cited emergency economic circumstances as a reason for having to pick up this extra side hustle.
And they certainly can't count on Social Security being there. And with an unstable income, it is difficult to save, in particular, to your point, when you don't have a structured 401k contribution. So what's your advice?
So there are a few things someone can do. And while Social Security, many people view it skeptically, the number one thing I tell people to do when you are a gig worker is to be sure and properly report your income so that you do in fact pay your self-employment taxes. That's when you do get credit for Social Security contributions. Many low-wage workers disproportionately rely on Social Security for their retirement income because that's all they have. And so the number one thing that they can do is to go ahead and pay those self-employment taxes. Now, if you do happen to be one of those gig workers that does have positive cash flow, you might want to take a look as to whether or not you are eligible for making contributions to a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA. And the benefit of doing that, if you do in fact qualify, is that you may also qualify for the Savers Credit, which Congress designed to be equivalent to the kind of matching contribution that a traditional employee might get from their employer.
If you can quickly, who does and does not qualify for those, and the difference between a traditional and a Roth IRA?
So the big difference between a traditional and Roth IRA is dependent upon whether or not you use pre-tax or after-tax contributions. If you use after-tax contributions to a Roth IRA, then when you take it out, you don't get taxed on it. Whereas in a traditional IRA, you get taxed when you get distributions on that. The eligibility requirements and the income requirements for the overall max that you can do if you're under 50 is $6,000. If you're over 50, it's a little bit more. They allow you to do a little bit of catching up on to encourage people that are over 50 to step up their retirement savings. The eligibility income requirements are explicitly listed out, and they are dependent upon your filing status. So whether or not you're single or married filing jointly, or married filing separately, or head of household. You can easily Google that on if you just Google IRS Roth IRA eligibility, or go to the IRS website. It's really clearly laid out right there.
I'm on it. Caroline Bruckner from the School of Business at American University. Great advice as we speed toward tax season. Appreciate your time. Have a great weekend.